Hello, skeptics and seekers family. I'm your host today, David Russell, the Christian. And yes, David Johnson is not here today. It's a little odd. You're just going to see my face, but there's a familiar face in the crowd too. So today we're going to be talking about politics. We're going to be giving the Christian response to the episodes you guys heard with David and Matthew and Sarah and Andrew and Brian with a Y, I think. If I got that wrong, Brian, you can correct me. This is going to give you guys plenty to talk about on politics, and I'm hoping it's the last one. At least David tells me it's the last one. So this is it. This is the Christian response. And upon reflecting on this notion of current events, politics, and David's skeptical panel, I have come to the point where I'm just tired of the whole enterprise. To give a proper response to all their hot air in the skeptics panel, I've compromised my own panel, made up of a political science major, and communications major, a lawyer, and you know who that is, and a wise minister, and possibly a Canadian if he comes in later. But throughout the skeptics' rhetoric, was their case convincing at all? No, I don't think so. Was it all over the place regarding actual current events? Yeah, I think it was. When it comes to politics, one could never separate worldview from it. They can't. I don't think you can separate your worldview and how you legislate and the ideas of right and wrong and so forth. Your worldview is the lens in which you view reality. David claims that we have lost the common ground. Is that right? Maybe. I consider those on this show to be the ones that would like to restore the common ground. But does this make up for the rest of the culture that doesn't care and bases their logic on sheer emotion? No. What does it boil down to? Everyone has a say in politics in America. That's just the truth of it. We get to vote. We get to have a say in what goes on. Everyone can in some way contribute. Was Donald Trump actually good politically? I don't know. What I do believe is he was an outpouring of years in the making, a result of a liberalism that has shifted so far to the left that it threatens the very fabric of the nation. Years of abundant socialistic policies that impede the notion of individual liberty, a notion of class systems that shouldn't exist in American thought. With that said, what is going on now? What is our current events? A stolen election? A nation divided? A dictator threatening the democracy? The issues that got us here are so much more profound than these things. We can easily rectify them. I mean, at least this whole idea of a stolen election or whatever. Why is this nation divided, though? To David, it's about the Christian and the conservative. To me, it's a lack of wisdom and a departure of thought by theist and non-theist alike. It is a lack of understanding, a lack in principle, a lack in commitment in a nation so comfortable that they bathe in the rivers of apathy. Tribes emerge to fight for rights they don't even know where they come from. Imagination and entertainment inform public opinion, while the media only report its company's biases to get ratings. Truth suffocates under the foot of ignorance, and pride blinds the average soul, eclipsing the betterment had in being wrong. In conclusion, what is wrong with us today? Like Chesterton said, I am. And I'm not afraid to say it. I am part of the problem. And I'm not afraid in that admission or where it takes me. I have an awesome panel today, the political science major. His name is Caleb Jackson. He is his first time on Skeptics and Seekers. Say hello, Caleb.
Hello, yeah, how are you all doing? I'm a political science and communications double major at Indiana University. I'm expecting to graduate in the spring, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Next, yeah, you saw Caleb before when he debated David Johnson on our show, Proselytize or Apostatize. The second person I'm going to introduce is Rob Lumberg. He's a first time on Skeptics and Seekers as well, and he is the wise minister. I've known Rob for a long time, and he's an apologist as well. And Rob, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, David. I've been involved in the defense of the faith for over 30 years in various capacities, from open forum panel discussions to open forum Q&A, also teaching and designing Christian apologetics courses at a local Bible Institute and seminary, one on the resurrection, one on worldviews, one on the defense of the authenticity of the Bible, and an entry-level course in Christian apologetics. And I'm one of these ones who basically believes that one, Christianity is true because I am a former skeptic, not like much of the skepticism today, but it is a privilege for me to be able to help David with the answers to some of the questions that we're going to be answering. And I also sent a link to the video that we are responding to, a conversation between my friend Corey Miller from Ratio Christi, who I used to serve with, and also Peter Boghossian, who's the author of the Handbook for Creating Atheists. So I hope you guys look at that. And I want you to know that we are meaning no harm, no disrespect. We want to open up the dialogue, and I'll just leave it right there.
Awesome. And finally, we have Teddy the Bear. Teddy, say hi. You're the lawyer here.
Hello, everyone. How are y'all?
That's all Teddy gets is a quick hi because she's been on so much. We all know her very, very well. Actually, she's been on PRA too. So that was really cool. We had a nice little discussion about the Shroud for you Shroud fans out there. So, guys, you guys listen to the tape, and I'm surprised I could get through my opening speech here because I've had strep throat the past week. So that's why you'll see me drinking a lot of water. There's no tea in the cup I'm drinking. That's why you see me switching back. It's actually throat coat tea, so I can continue talking. So, yeah, so it's been a rough week for me. I was swallowing glass earlier this week. So, yeah, so that's what it felt like. So I'm surprised I could get through the speech. I only wrote it out. I didn't type it, which makes me flow a lot better. But typing it is so much better. But I'm surprised I could read my own chicken scratch there. But so when it comes to these politics and stuff like this, okay, David said that we have no common ground. There's no more common ground to be found. What is your guys' first thoughts on that? And guys, this is all of our show. So if you guys got stuff you want to add in, feel free. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation. Don't all go at once, please.
Ladies first.
Oh, in terms of whether we all have common ground, I think that there is a dividing line, quite frankly, politically. I think that with the Democratic Party leadership, I think there is a dividing line. I think that they are in it for the power and for self-enrichment, and I don't think they really care about the people. They use the people, they exploit their base in order for them to get into power, so that once they get into government, they then have access to a lot of connections, a lot of information that helps enrich them. And we have seen that with a lot of the Democratic Party leadership. With the base itself, the Democratic Party base, I do think that Republicans have common ground with them. And the common ground is that we care about people. And we care about our own well-being. We want our families and ourselves to thrive in this country, but we also want the whole country and its populace to thrive as well. But what is problematic and what creates this massive tension between Republicans, especially conservative Republicans, and the Democratic Party base, is how you accomplish that well-being. And I believe that the Democratic base has fallen hook, line, and sinker for all of the stuff, all of the garbage that is churned out by their leadership. And it's kind of like the old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They make it sound like socialistic type policies and redistribution of wealth are a great idea, and naturally that can sound really good to somebody that doesn't have much money and that's struggling. But what they don't realize, they don't, like in a chess game, they don't look a couple of moves ahead to see how all that works. When people don't get rewarded with money or whatever for their efforts, for their work, they stop working. And then, you know what? You have equality of misery, like what you see in Cuba and the old Soviet Union. And, you know, and it's always the leadership that pushes for that particular type of change. They always somehow end up on top. So the Nancy Pelosi's of the world will always, and the Joe Bidens of the world and their family, they will always still have money, just like the elite in the Soviet Union. And even now, they all still, you know, have their money too, while everybody else suffers. So I think that's where the big division is, but not between just the Democratic Party base and the Republican base. And I think that there is that commonality. It's just we disagree on what the appropriate way is to get to everybody prospering.
All right. Well, hey guys, we just had Dale Glover join us. Hey Dale, what's going on, man?
Hey David, how's it going?
Good, good.
Hey Dale.
I'm just
Hey,
gonna
Dale.
ask everybody to mute their mics while someone's giving any like long speech. But who wants the next shot? I mean, where's the common ground between? Do we have common ground still between conservatives and David's crowd? You know, do we have any merit? Can we say anything useful?
I think.
Caleb, why don't you give it a shot? You're the political science major.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, Rob, do you want to go?
No, go for it. No, you're the
Okay.
you're the poli sci guy. Go for it, and I'll
You're good. I'm not an expert. But yeah, I think, and this is going to be different per person, but because I am more on the libertarian side, I think there is more middle ground in that area, because I would probably agree with David Johnson on a lot of issues, definitely not everything, but I think that the idea between conservatives and liberals both want individual liberty. I think they just perceive it in different ways. For liberals for Democrats, because I think classic liberals are more libertarian, so I don't like using that word. So I'll say progressives or Democrats view individual liberty as more social in your life, who you can marry, what you can do with your body, stuff like that. And I think that Republicans tend to view it more when it comes to freedom from government and freedom from the economic regulation, right? So the ability to own your business and operate that as you see fit. So I think there is a lot of common ground, and there's just different ways to differentiate it. But I think that we do have common problems that we agree are problems. I think we just have different solutions as far as how to solve that. And I like what Teddy was saying earlier with the control and socialism and stuff like that, because I do think it's interesting that I think the main problem that I see with radical progressivism is that it takes away the idea of self-reliance, because there's the classic phrase of, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. I think when you have and I'm not against helping people, obviously, but I think when you have programs that you give people like healthcare or education, whenever there are threats to cut those programs, they almost use it like it's a gun to the head, like, oh, if you do so-and-so, all these people are going to die and are going to be like that. Then you ask, well, why are they like that in the first place? It's because you put them in a situation. So I think that government tries to solve the problems that it makes in itself. we have a student loan crisis, which is a problem. Who's the one who gave the loans out in the first place? I think we have a drug epidemic, but who's the one who was doing all the regulation, the war on drugs in the first place? So I think every problem that government tries to solve is a problem that it itself created. So I think that getting it out of not completely getting rid of the government, but getting it out of many areas is a way to solve that. And that's just, I think, a big issue. And I also would challenge, I think with the economic issues, I would challenge anyone to find a corporation that has not benefited, that has not gained advantage from government intervention or regulation. I can't think of a single major international monopoly that's gotten successful without any kind of government benefit as far as intellectual property or regulation and so forth. I think the only reason companies get overblown is because of bailouts and stuff like that. You hear the phrase too big to fail, and yet the reason they were too big to fail is because they keep getting bailouts and keep getting rewarded for bad behavior. So I do think we have a common problems, but I think that our issues are where it comes to who's causing the problems in the first place. And I would argue that government tries to solve the problems it makes, which is like breaking someone's legs and then giving them crutches and saying that's solving the problem. So that's just how I would put that.
Well, I don't think I could say it any better than what Teddy and Caleb have actually summarized. But I'm hearing certain things. I'm hearing a key word that is resonating, and it was one that I heard while watching the video that we are responding to, and that's the word worldview. If you have a faulty worldview, if you have faulty answers to origin, meaning, morality, destiny, and being, you're going to have a trickle-down effect in politics. Because if you have a faulty worldview, speaking from a theological perspective, a faulty worldview begets a faulty theology. A faulty theology then deals with faulty ethics and morals, and then faulty ethics and morals breaks down to faulty politics. And when I mention politics, I'm talking about both sides of the aisle. There are certain things I think every one of us here on our panel today would agree with the conservative side, but there may be some differing areas where we might not totally agree on. But one thing we do believe is that each human being is created in the image and likeness of God, the God that we are responding to, the folks that you guys don't believe in. But if you have a faulty politic, if you have faulty theology, you have faulty ethics, morals, and values. And if you have faulty ethics, morals, and values, then you have faulty politics. And if you have faulty politics, then you get faulty laws. And this is what Teddy and Caleb were summarizing, because bad law comes from bad politics. Bad politics comes from bad theology. Bad theology comes from bad ethics and morals. Bad ethics and morals falls back on a faulty worldview. So the question then is, where is meaning and purpose found? And where meaning and purpose is found in a personal relationship with a God who we believe exists. So I think with everything that we've summarized, I could go all the way back to, I'm 60 years old. I can go back to when welfare was created. And that was along the lines of what Caleb had summarized, where you create a government dependency. Well, what is that based off of? It's based on a faulty worldview where you go and you take the responsibility away from somebody to go and be able to catch a fish so that they'd be able to eat for life. So all that said, I'll leave it there, I guess.
All right, Rob, thank you for your input. Joe, do you got anything on this one, bud?
So yeah, the original question is just, is there any middle ground, I guess, between...
Yeah, is it gone, basically? That's what David thinks. He thinks it's totally gone.
Yeah, I just fundamentally disagree with, it could be gone with people like David J. Like, I don't think I'd be able to reach middle ground with someone like him because he's very entrenched, but for sure, I know people that you can discuss with them, and you can use reason to reason with them. They're made in the image of God, as Rob was saying, and that sort of thing. So yeah, short answer is yes. I do think that there is some middle ground that we can find.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think there is. it's not like we haven't faced such division before. One thing they said in the panel about, this nation's always, they were never united. Well, I mean, that's not the point in a way. Uniting the colonies wasn't the same as uniting in ideas. They argued about a lot of this stuff. They argued about things, but there is a common theme that you see throughout the framers that did pop up. And this is this idea of consent of the governed, individual liberty, and I mean, those are the two, and religious freedom. I mean, these three things pop up a lot, and there were always ideas of how to go about it. And I do want to get into history, but not quite yet. When a person gets on and says they can't engage with a person of faith, once we can never have any common ground because you're a person of faith. You guys remember that part in the video, right? I want to hear your thoughts on that. There's no bridge, for faith versus empiricism. What do you guys think about that?
I'd like to jump on that. Yeah, I'd like to jump right in on that one because I've been to a couple of Reason rallies up in D.C., and they find that a lot of Christians that atheists talk to, they want to start. We want, and of course, I don't. And of course, we had our panel discussion on where your starting points are. That's where I go cumulative case, David, on something like that, because you want to start with where they are. And of course, a lot of times what happens with atheism is they don't know really the definition of faith. They believe that faith is something that you can't see, and you're believing something that can't see, or faith is believing something that has no evidence to it, or as Peter Boghossian would say in his handbook for creating atheists, faith is believing in something that isn't true, which then he's committing the appeal to authority, saying that his street epistemology is the true approach. So the question is, where does epistemology begin? And then, how do you know what you know? Well, of course, we can go and say we start with the senses, and this is where I go classical on the fact that it starts with the senses, the five senses. You start moving forward with that, and then something inside of us pushes us beyond to go investigate outside of the senses. So the definition of faith is not just blind. It's not blind at all. Faith, I go back to the bumper sticker that we see, particularly around the Quantico area here where you and I, David, live, and we see Semper Fide. And that's that's the code for the Marines, and it means always trustworthy. So the question then is, what is faith? Faith is trust. So then when you start looking at it from faith versus empiricism or anti-theism, because the empirical approach, I was talking to a guy with his son. He was from Clarksville. He had a banner that they were carrying at the Reason rally, the last one we went to in 2016. It says Clarksville Atheists. I walked up to him. I said, "Boy, you guys are far from home." He said, "We are." I said, "Welcome to Washington, D.C. Why are you an atheist?" He said, "Because I don't see any evidence for God." I said, "Well, would there be any evidence for you believing if we gave you evidence? If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?" No. So the conversation went forward, and I asked him if he was married, of course, and I said, "Do you believe your wife is beautiful?" "Yes." I said, "Can you test that scientifically for me?" He says, "I can't." There's about 5 things that William Lane Craig brings in that cannot be tested scientifically, and I brought those things up to him, but it came down to this. I said, if we see that tree over there, and you asked me where that tree came from, and I told you God put it there, you'd accuse me of committing the God of the gaps fallacy. But everything that this gentleman had told me along the lines expressed to me that he had faith in science. And when I brought that up to him, he says, I don't have faith. I says, I'm sorry, I didn't know you believed that. But it seems like what you are going and telling me is that science is not telling us something even now. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about empiricism. You're telling me that you have faith in science. What you're doing, sir, is committing science of the gaps. And he says, we're done. But basically, what I wanted to do as gently as possible was create an environment of dignity and respect for the gentleman who had his 10-year-old son with him, to show his son that the emperor had no clothes. And there is a difference between faith and science, but I will say this. Faith and science are not enemies. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do, and their worldview is wrapped in on that premise.
Just like politics.
Just like politics, yeah.
So, yeah, Teddy, what do you got on that? I saw you click off your mute button. I guess you want to go next.
I just clicked it off, but I will go next if you want. The whole issue of faith in science, I find it fascinating that so many people have this faulty notion about what it is, the knowledge that we get from science. And I think that it's like fact. And I think that's incorrect. I mean, it gives us probabilities as to whether something is fact, but there is a tremendous amount of faith. It depends, sometimes more than others in terms of amount. But for example, with science, when we base our decision making in life on science, we say, oh, well, I shouldn't eat too many eggs because it will raise my cholesterol levels. But then science says, a year later, oh, no, it's okay to eat eggs. It won't harm your cholesterol levels. And then it changes again. And so science is based on studies. It's based on clinical trials. It is all about probabilities. And I think we, Christians need to sometimes pull back that curtain and see the Wizard of Oz science for, it's a scientist doing a little study, and then we extrapolate all of this information from certain studies and we call it science. And don't we have to have faith that the study was done with integrity? Don't we have to have faith that the people that were involved in the study gave full disclosure in terms of whether they had certain conditions or not? There's a tremendous amount of faith that goes into believing what science tells us. With drugs, for example, like pharmaceuticals, in terms of science, we know that the value that we derive from science is repeating the experiment and seeing that we get the same results. And the more that we can repeat the experiment and get the same results, that increases our confidence level. Yet, for example, with medicine is a perfect situation where we can see that sometimes there might be side effects that happen with 1 in 1,000 people, 1 in 1,000,000 people. Well, so what that means is that you can repeat the experiment 1,000 or 1,000,000 times and it keeps giving you the same result. And then there's that outlier and you never know when it's going to pop up. So, I just like to sometimes bring people to a little bit more reality that we use faith all the time. I mean, when I step outside, I am having faith that I'm not going to be shot by a stray bullet. When I get into my car, I have faith that I'm hopefully not going to get into a car accident and die. And so one of the things that really makes me crazy when atheists and leftists talk, and I think that they tend to be, maybe not 100%. I don't know that I've ever come across a conservative atheist. I think that there is a reason why most atheists are leftists, because they have the same type of process of analyzing things, and it's a very faulty process. And that's how they get a lot of their beliefs. They don't think things all the way through, and so for example, they always, when somebody disagrees with them, or when they disagree with someone else, they always want to hold the other person to, you need to give me evidence like 100%, or at least, 99.9. Yet, if you pay attention and listen to the arguments that they make, they'll give all these flim-flam arguments. They are always the big fallacy police with other people, yet I routinely catch them engaged in fallacies when they argue. And so it is this constant shift. And back to the whole thing about engaging with atheists and leftists, because again, I tend to, in general, lump them in the same category because they operate in the same way. And that is that there is a, I hate to say it, but I'm gonna, because it's true. There is oftentimes a lack of integrity in terms of how they argue. They are frequently, there's frequently not good faith that goes on. And they frequently make arguments that they know, or at least I should hope, well, they're usually very sharp and very intelligent. And so they have to know, given that they're quick on pointing out fallacious reasoning when everybody else is doing it. So when they engage in it, how do we not assume that they know precisely what they are doing? And when they make statements, for example, Andrew on the show was talking about how the Supreme Court of the United States is now, going to let churches, kill off some of their most vulnerable people, the elderly. Well, first of all, if you're elderly and you're at a greater risk of getting COVID-19, maybe don't go to church. Or if you do go to church, you're assuming the risk. But they, of course, never apply that to all of the rioting that was going on in the streets with Black Lives Matter. Oh, coronavirus doesn't spread when all of these people are out in the streets. It's always the double standard, and the double standard is disingenuous. And one of the things that really, really anger me, that skeptics, well, it's not skeptics. I'm a skeptic too. I like to question things. I like, good arguments, and good arguments based on as much, fact as we can have. But, there's a crude expression that unfortunately is the perfect expression for what they love to try and do to conservatives especially. And that is the expression of where somebody says, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. And they try to do that all of the time. They try to tell it like they're trying to gaslight us, thinking that we're somehow so stupid as to believe that. But one of the things that the left is so good at is, because most of the time they're not grounded, and no, there are leftists that are Christians or that profess to be, but they don't seem to find their hands getting tied in terms of how they fight, the way actual devout Christians do. So they will engage in dishonest and violent maneuvers in order to try to oppress and suppress opposition. And they will do all sorts of crooked things in order to gain, because again, power is their God. That is their ultimate God. And they, and so many leftists who are Christians, they put their party is, and being in lockstep with it, that is their most important religion. And I believe, I have a theory, and I'm pretty sure it's right, that a lot of these people that are leftists who were Christians, I believe that as the Democratic Party started to get more radicalized over the past, especially the past 10 to 20 years, look at so many, David Russell, the atheists that we deal with, so many of them were heavy duty Christians before, and we know that they're leftists. And then they ended up leaving their faith. And I think it is because so much of their leftist politics clash with Christianity. And so then they're thinking, well, which am I going to do? And of course, leftist politics demands that people be in lockstep. Whereas with the Republican Party, we're all, we're independent type people. We don't fall into lockstep with anybody. We try to figure out what is right, and then we do it. And we frequently disagree amongst ourselves, but the leftists, they'll just, get right in line. And
they do that a lot. And
oh yeah.
I want to get on to I want to move on to Caleb's response. I see him writing down a lot of stuff there, so I want to hear what Caleb has to say on this, and then I'm going to try to cover some other things kind of quickly so we can get into the historical role of government and why we are at where we are today, type stuff. So, Caleb, what's your response on this one? The faith and versus empiricism.
Yeah, I like to write down a lot of this stuff. So I have a couple notes. First, I would like to say that I would probably disagree with Teddy a little bit on the lumping together of liberals and atheists. Because, there are, for example, Robert Price, who's an atheist New Testament scholar, is a Republican. There are also libertarian atheists like Michael Shermer and Penn Jillette. And there are even atheist and secular pro-life groups. So I know it is true that a majority tend to lean that way, but I don't try to lump all of them.
Because I do see a difference between liberals and leftists.
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that to a certain extent. But I think it is partially a worldview issue, and I think if you know the friendly atheist Hemant Mehta, if that's how you say his name, I think it is. He had a whole video about how he said atheists can't be Republicans, and he got quite a lot of backlash. And every other comment was, "I'm an atheist and a Republican, so your comment's invalid." But so I don't try to assume that people are in a certain camp, but it is true the majority do lean a certain way. When it comes to faith and science, I also don't think that there is initially a contradiction. I think there are certain tenets of faith might have contradictions. If we're going to talk the age of the earth or certain very specific, but nothing major in the Christian doctrine has to be in contradiction with mainline science. And I do think that there is, although I do like science, and I think the idea of peer review is important because it's not just one person making a claim, right? It's important to test out repeat the experiment, see if you get the same result, and report that. And the idea that science changes doesn't really bother me because I think it's good to correct mistakes. And so I would rather have something that can correct itself than something that just never refuses to change. So I think those are important. I would like to build up science in that case, but I also don't think scientism is a good worldview. The idea that everything has to be scientific, I think that's actually self-refuting, because if every statement can only be true if it's backed up by science, that statement itself cannot be backed up by science. It's a philosophical assumption. So I don't think you can put science over philosophy, and I think you have to merge the two together. So I'm definitely not a science has to solve everything. I think science is nice. And even if you look at American doctors, for example, 55% believe they've seen a miracle, and 75% believe that miracles can happen. So it's not as if there's this whole dichotomy between the two. I think that that's perfectly reasonable. In fact, the what was it? One of the I forget her name, but she was like a major president of a bunch of health organizations. She did a whole study on the miracles of the Catholic Church that their saints would have to perform, or they'd have to perform in order to become accepted to be a saint, or whatever the initiation process is. And she talks about how the Catholic Church fully embraces science, that they actually don't just do it on faith. They have doctors that have to be there to confirm the disease. They have to name the doctors, say what the patient has, say that it can't be cured, report that it was cured, all this very technical process. Same with exorcisms. They have to recommend they go see a mental health professional, then a doctor. So it's not as if they just all like, oh, it's God and it's not, I think you have to be careful with that and reasonably skeptical. But I also appreciate that both of them can use science and faith correspondingly. And I guess a last thing I would say is that I wouldn't say that Christian leftists are putting party over Christianity. I mean, that might be true to an extent, but I also never try to assume I can read people's minds and tell if they're lying or if they're being inconsistent. So I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think Joe Biden is a devout Catholic. I don't think he's a secret conniving secularist who just wants to undermine all of evangelicalism. So I do disagree with a lot of his policies, but I can appreciate some principles of helping immigrants and helping the poor and having at least that heart. I would disagree with how they go about doing that. I don't think we have to do it through force and violence of taxation. I would rather people do it of their own free will. But I can at least appreciate that they're talking about that conversation and that they, care about the environment, for example. I think we should be good stewards of the environment as Christians in God's creation. So I would just end by saying I don't really see any inconsistency, and I think people point out inconsistencies just to further divide and to get people out to vote. But I think if you look down, we all have a lot more in common than most people would be willing to admit.
Caleb, can I get in?
Hold on one sec. I want to get Dale's response first before we move on. Now, Dale, do you got anything on this one?
I think the three participants really covered all the bases in terms of the issue of scientism and faith being employed in various worldviews. Atheists employ faith. Science would be impossible without it as well. It depends how you define, I guess, the word faith. We're using it in the same way. It's sort of like a trust. You can allocate your trust in something, in the evidence or something like that, and that's the way we're using it, whereas they have something else in mind. I also agree that we do need this principle of charity when we're trying to understand the other side, and it sort of relates to what Teddy was seeing when she's very angry because she sees this inconsistency and hypocrisy in politics. And to be honest, it does happen on both sides and that sort of thing. So I think I would agree with Caleb that we need this principle of charity, and that will help. Don't just try to score cheap political points by having one standard for your side and then another standard for the other. Try to be consistent across the board. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I get that too. One of the things that I want to say is when David was given the speech, he was trying to say that we have such an epistemological differences that there's no way now in these days we could come together. And I just want to comment now that I put together a diversity of people. Dale's from Canada. Caleb
sitting here in my
a libertarian.
So.
Caleb's from are a political science major and a libertarian. I'm a constitutional conservative. Teddy's a conservative, and Rob's a conservative, conservative libertarian, from what I understood what he said. Yeah, Teddy, you're muted, so you're not really getting through.
I was saying, and I'm a constitutional conservative too.
Yeah, so we have a wide spectrum here, and we're going to disagree at times. That's one of the things that I wanted to put this panel together, that we would disagree on some things.
Actually,
because
I am an originalist. So.
I believe, yeah, you said originalist, yeah. Okay, so we're going to disagree on things, but what I want to show is that there can be unity in diversity, and I think that's the whole idea of the American founding, that we could have unity and diversity, especially of thought, and we can Just because I have faith and you don't, doesn't mean we can't talk about common issues that we're going to face. This common ground hasn't left. It's only left because you've turned your back. You said you can't take it anymore, David. You said that you could, you're done. You can't have the conversation anymore. So you just turn your back, basically. So that's never going to get anything accomplished. And, there's a huge difference in the way things were back then to the way things are now. I'd go in a coffee shop and not talk to anybody. No social interaction, right? Except for the barista that's making my drink. But a coffee bar back in the 1700s was filled with philosophical, theological, and all sorts of current event debates. They forced each other to talk. They talked about how to govern, how do we better ourselves. We've lost that in this society. We've lost that in this day and age. We're so comfortable. We're so comfortable that we become apathetic. There's a pockets of groups that want to come out and start riots and stuff like that. But how many of us just sat and watched that from our TV? We are so comfortable. If it's not messing with us, not bothering, it's just entertainment. Everything's entertainment. We do have issues here. I think these are issues. I think these are the big issues that underline all this. David said that the other is not just wrong. And I hope you guys remember, because I'm just giving kind of quotes, because there's no way I can, stop segment 2 hour and 40-minute video to play clips for everybody. He said something along the lines as, we can't have a conversation because the other is not just wrong, but now they're the enemy. The funny thing is the way these guys were talking, it seems that that's how they view us in a lot of ways. We're the ones that are getting called names and stuff like that. I mean, if I disagree with somebody on a matter of racial issues, I get called a bigot, or a racist. It's a go-to these days. So, what do you guys think about this? I call this section, and let's just give a quick one here. Let's try not to go too long on it, because I do want to get to the historical stuff. But the whole idea that, when you're wrong, you're not just wrong, but you're an enemy, and basically the intolerance of the tolerant is what I'm calling this. Anybody got any thoughts on that? Let's go in reverse order. Dale, do you got any thoughts on this?
Oh goodness. So yeah, I guess he was sort of quoting me in that I do use biblical terminologies. I think that I do see the world binary, right? You're either on Christ's side or on Satan's side. Satan's the ruler of the world and that sort of stuff. So I use biblical language like this, and then they misinterpret that. You're almost saying you're not a human being or something like. Oh, where'd he go? Can you guys still hear me? Or yeah, okay. So yeah. So I don't think that we should see people who disagree with us as enemies in the sense that those skeptics were going on about. That's not the way I see even David J. I mean, we've had plenty of private conversations, and he said some things that I find atrocious. You guys would be shocked, or maybe not, at some of the things that he says and believes. It's literally crazy. But I still see him as a friend who's just very wrong, and need, I do my best to try and correct him. And by the way, I've been wrong on some things, and he's done his bit to help correct me on stuff. So I don't see the need to, just because we disagree politically or religiously, that we need to be enemies, quote unquote enemies, in the sense that they mean it. But I have no shame in repeating the Bible that, yeah, you are an enemy of God if you're not in his flock. There's Bible verses that say that, so I can't deny what the Bible says. So yeah, maybe it's just on us to clarify what we mean when we use that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, to go without saying is like, just because there's this political divide out into the streets and into the cities and so forth, yeah, it doesn't mean that us in here are really having that opinion, because I really like David too. And I really have a heart for him. He's a good guy. I'd give my kidney for him, like he says. So I mean, we're cool on that aspect, and I get that. But I mean, don't you guys think that there is a common issue out in the public arena where if you don't agree with a certain status quo, now you're the enemy. Antifa's going to show up to your protest and start throwing M80s at you. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see our side doing that. I don't see our side showing up to protest and becoming violent. And maybe they think it's because of the social issues have gotten to the point where they're fighting injustice. But to me, it's like, okay, but where does justice even come from? We're not even going to talk about that. You think you have these rights, but where do these rights even come from? I mean, there's no referent. They have no referent for them. And
Yeah.
I think this goes a long way to show that we have lost the ability to really think things through, and that we are plagued with a society that bases its logic on emotion. But yeah, Caleb, what do you got to say on that one?
Yeah, so I liked what you all were saying about our battle. I think there's the verse in the Bible. It's like our battle's not with flesh and blood, but with the powers of this world, which is referring to the demonic and Satan and so forth. So I would agree that I think everyone is made in God's image, and that we're all brothers. Even if we're not all brothers in Christ, with unbelievers, we still have that shared humanity. I think that we all embrace. I also think that because there's this hostility and this divide is why nothing, statistically, Congress has been the least productive recently than it's ever been in American history. And I think a lot of that is because of what I kind of call this like sportsman mentality of, I think we treat politics like it's a sports game of my team has to win and beat yours out and get the majority and all that, when the goal should be let's get good stuff passed. But it's not even compromise anymore. It's that side's not going to help, so we have to get a majority so that we can do whatever we want, and they're just going to protest it. So I think everyone either votes against a side or votes for a side, but there's hardly ever any bipartisanship, it doesn't feel like. And I think that's why that's such an issue, is I would like to see a lot of bipartisanship and a lot of negotiating, a lot of common ground, because we'd get a lot more done. But just treating it like it's a competition, I think, is a terrible way to do it, and it just is why politics is so nasty. I think it's just so divisive and negative. And I think there are admittedly people on both sides who I think are extremes, and we both agree. My church recently did a study called Separation of Church and Hate, which I thought was a clever pun. But I think there are people on both sides who are extremes and who are minorities, but are also very loud. You could just look on the right, there are pastors who are like, oh, we should execute homosexuals. They don't use that term. They use a more perverse term. And like Westboro Baptist Church and all those people where I think are just so hateful. And you have people on the left as well who are, like, oh, we should kill cops and they're pigs and all that stuff. So I think both sides have the negative, and the negative is a very, very small minority, but they're also just very vocal and very loud because they get all the media attention. And I think it should be the job of the moderates on the sides to stand up and say, hey, no, we're going to condemn that. That's not okay to say that. And we're going to tell you from within our own camp that that's not okay. I think both sides should take accountability for that. Just as a last point, I liked what David said about David Russell, not David Johnson, about justice, and the fact that I think this idea of human rights is a theistically based view. I mean, they'll call themselves humanists, but I also think that that's just committing a bias of speciesism, because you're a human, you happen to be biased towards humans, but if you're an animal, you clearly wouldn't. And there's always the thought of experiment of, what if aliens came down and they were so much more intelligent than us, and they wanted to use our skin as clothes and wanted to eat us for food? Would that be moral or immoral? If they're that much more intelligent, and we do that with animals, so does that justify them doing it with us if we're animals compared to them? So I don't think if it's just going to be whatever species is the most intelligent and there's no objective value to it, then I don't think you can make a basis off of that. Even Bertrand Russell, who was quoted as saying, I think that the universe is built on the pillars of despair because there was no meaning in life and no meaning to human morality. Even he was against nuclear war, and he admitted the inconsistency, because if you don't believe humans have value and the world's going to end anyway and we'll go extinct, what difference does it make if we wipe ourselves out with nuclear things? And he basically admitted that I don't have an answer to that. I admit it's inconsistent, and I just can't live my life that way. I think ultimately everyone, whether they acknowledge it or not, does not live life as if it were meaningless. They might invent meaning, but if you're going to pretend that there's meaning and invent that, then why is that any different than pretending there's a God and inventing that for comfort, right? So I think you either have to admit there's objective meaning, or you have to admit that it's subjective and invented. But if it's subjective and invented, then that's really not much different than positing that there's a God that you invent to make comfort. So I don't think it's consistent on that part.
Amen. All right, Rob.
I'm just going to springboard on 2 points. Thank you, Caleb, for what you shared, because I was just shouting inside. You know, somebody mentioned about, how this culture is emotionally charged. I did a show with Tony Garuli a couple of years ago. We talked about this whole thing about how our culture, and I think it's stemming from the university, because the university professor has about 30 years influence on each student that they touch. And of course, what's coming out right now, we're getting the worldview of cultural Marxism and all kinds of liberal ideologies and liberal things that are happening. But those that are on the left, those that do not hold to biblical values, I consider them as listening with their eyes and thinking with their feelings. And it is very sobering to think where our culture is going. And, you talk about this justice thing. You look at some of these movements like BLM and all, and I have actually had some conversations with people who are Black Americans, African Americans, Black, call them what you may. They're darker, they have a darker hue of skin color than I do. And first thing I tell them, number one, I am not Westboro Baptist Church. Number two, I believe that you and I have souls. Of course, an atheist might wrestle with that. Thirdly, I believe that you are created in the image and likeness of the God you believe or don't believe in. And my question to you about BLM, I do believe Black Lives Matter. I do not agree with the movement. Why? Because of this whole thing on justice. They're looking for justice. They're looking for justice that everyone here on this panel is supposed to be guilty of, because we're white males for the majority of us. And of course, Ms. D'Angelo was talking about white fragility, and she wrote a book on it. Because of that, we are where we are in all of this. But justice, where does justice really come from? And if you are a skeptic and you want justice, say, for somebody who has been shot by a police officer or somebody else in a drive-by shooting, and that justice comes, are you really satisfied with the justice that's been doled out? I believe the answer to that would be no. I've had the argument for justice. And of course, C.S. Lewis, that's what C.S. Lewis wrestled with, the whole idea. If there's not absolute justice, there is no God. But there has to be absolute justice, therefore there is a God. But
All right, Teddy, you got anything on this one?
Yes. In terms of, you were talking about each particular political group, whether we are enemies or not. And I think many of us, we have friends that cross these political lines. But then there's the issue that we are starting to come closer and come closer to. And that is, at what point do you have to break off friendships and friendly ties with people who seek to impinge upon your liberty and the liberty of others. So with these leftists where they say, oh, they can't deal with us, we're not trying to impinge upon their liberty. We're liberty loving, and what we love the most is preserving the right of the individual, not the collective. Because when you are talking always about the collective, a lot of times the individual ends up just disappearing. And so we believe in everybody's right to have that individual liberty, and we believe that it's from God. But so at what point, because, the leftists like to say, oh, if you support one person, oh, you must be a racist or this or that. Well, so at what point, as conservatives, as we have friends who might be getting more and more radical, and I don't know that they will ever come to this point, but just to make a point, to highlight a concept. Is it okay if we are friends with somebody that is a member of the KKK? Is it okay if we are friends with, if Hitler were still alive, if we were friends with Hitler? Like, oh, I disagree with, what he wants to do to the Jews and everybody else that he doesn't think is, his ideal of the human race. So I disagree with him politically, but hey, I can still be buddies with him. So given the extreme, like what Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot were doing, obviously infringing upon a lot of people's personal liberty, you can't be friends with people like that. You have to absolutely not only condemn them, there is the moral obligation to fight them. They are the enemies of liberty. And when somebody rises to the level of becoming an enemy of liberty, and honestly, our leftist friends are that, because that is what they support. And we are seeing in America, this is America. I mean, we've gone through the looking glass. I don't recognize what is going on in America, and I'm old enough to know what it used to be like. And this is just, it's bizarro world, what is happening. And so these leftist friends of ours do have culpability for helping to bring that about. Now, I'm not saying that quite yet it's to the point where we have to, be enemies with them, even on a personal level. I wouldn't say that we're at that point yet, but I fear, and I don't delight in saying that, because I have a lot of friends who are, quite frankly, leftists, not just liberals. And back in the day, like in the 80s and in the 90s, when the Democratic Party had more liberals as opposed to leftists, we had a lot more of a common ground. I mean, for example, the ACLU, they were the ones that brought the case to the Supreme Court to permit the KKK to march in Skokie, Illinois, in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood full of Holocaust victims. The ACLU was standing up for the as much as they obviously detested the KKK and their message, they were enough of believers and fighters for our First Amendment freedom of expression and freedom of speech and freedom to organize with people, to still fight for that sort of speech, as reprehensible as they knew it was. But when you have free speech, in order to have that, you have to be able to stomach hearing a lot of ugly things. That is just part and parcel of free speech. And if you only want to have free speech that you like, which that is really inherently what leftists want. They're the most intolerant people. They preach, and again, it has to do with the dishonesty of how they fight. They preach tolerance, tolerance, tolerance up until you disagree with them. And because they tend to surround themselves around a bunch of people that think the same way, they think that, oh, they're being so tolerant because look at all these people that have different views. But they're all pretty much the same. But so as soon as they come against a conservative who disagrees, oh no, we've got to shut them down. So where's the tolerance? Who's the intolerant one? So it comes to a point where a lot of these are some of the Republicans are our enemies, the ones that try too hard to be sweet to the enemy, thinking that, oh, if we just play really nice, then maybe we can work something out. These Republicans are stupid, because if they have not learned from history, look at what has been happening. So many of these Republicans try to not just completely butt heads with the radical leftists to try to play nice with them, and they keep crushing us, and they keep just putting us down. And so there comes a point where people have to stop being suckers, and they have to fight for what is right. And I cannot stand the person that just wants to sit there and constantly compromise on core principles. It's fine. I'm big on compromising things that aren't down to your core principles, but they want to shut us down. Look at for example, with Facebook. No, granted, that's not the government doing that, but people that still, with what's going on, we're seeing more and more clamping down on freedom of speech, freedom of association. Look at what they've been doing to churches in terms of, for the longest time, you can't go to church, but let violent riots go on? Sure. And then when coronavirus numbers start increasing,
we just started meeting, all of our church just started meeting at Walmart, since we are allowed in there.
Good for them. Good for
I'm
them.
just joking. I'm just joking.
I
get what you're saying, Teddy. I do. I really do get what you're saying there.
I was just gonna say, don't turn your church into a strip club, like that one. You guys hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that. What are you talking about?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, it was on what do you mean? That's where I saw it. But yeah, apparently one pastor is doing like a little strip show. Obviously not all the way down, but because churches aren't allowed, but strip clubs are. So he does a little dance at the beginning or something. But yeah,
one way to get people in church.
I had somebody yesterday tell me that Christianity has oppressed all of the other religions over the centuries and over the years. That's why you have to say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. That's another show, but I just figured I'd jump that in on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on I think there is a divide. I think we understand that there is, but I don't think anybody in this panel is at the point where we're like, you're the enemy. You're the enemy. David Johnson's my enemy. No. But there are things, policies, and stuff that we can disagree vigorously over, and just say, you know what? Let's, this is about the consent of the governed. All right. This is about self-government. Let's put it to a vote. Let's put the representative in there that's going to represent us, and see where it goes from there. Right. We can take that. That's what we agreed to.
So long as the vote's legitimate. Because when you take away,
we'll get to that, Teddy. We'll get to that. I promise. But okay, so the thing is like, there is a point where we will not compromise any longer. I do agree with that, and I think David spelled that out in his video as well. the idea that I don't understand is the grace period is expired. You know, the grace period is not expired. We should be able to say, okay, this is what's wrong with the system. Let's fix it. Let's actually look into these and get a round table together and look at these issues. You know, we talked about is there systematic racism on PRA? We did a live. I heard both testimonies. Sorry. But the funny thing is that when I started looking at the stats that were given, I found out through other people and other people's researches that there are disparities in the stats that were quoted. Huge disparities that would pretty much make the problem non-existent, or not the problem, or the particular genre non-existent. You know, how do we deal with that together? How do we deal with, okay, there's a stat that comes out, right, that says there's systematic racism, okay? People that do stats also come out and say, okay, here's the disparities here that pretty much nullify the stat. And let's say another group says, oh, no, this is correct. Where do we come together and basically say, okay, what's really going on here? What's the best way to do that? We have to be more social with each other. We have to connect with each other more than what we are now. Otherwise, these stats are going to remain. They're not going to be countered. They're not going to be brought to the public's attention because the media doesn't care. They only care what makes them ratings. Maybe we're going to have to blow up the coffee houses again and start having debates in coffee houses again, you know? I mean, I'm not talking about blow up, like literally blow up. I'm not talking about that. You all know
I'm all on board with that.
I think that's great.
Go into the coffee houses, have those social areas again to where, you know, hey, let's have a discussion. I mean, how many of us actually go to a town hall these days? Like, do we go to them all the time? No, we don't. We are part of the problem too. We are on this side of the spectrum. At least for myself, I recognize that yes, I am kind of part of this problem too because I haven't engaged enough either. I look at my screen time that Apple gives me every week, and I'm on the phone way too much. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think there's issues here. I don't think we're at the point where we have to separate. I don't know what was lost between the 90s when we were watching in living color and everybody made fun of everybody to the point here where we can't say anything without somebody being so offended they're ready to start a riot. The whole idea with this police brutality stuff, we always understood that there were bad apples in the bunch. Always understood that. And we have to do something about it, you know? Yes. Do we need to even reform things on top of it? Absolutely, yes. So this brings me to the next, and I'm going to try to like kind of.
Can I mention something really quick that's really important?
Go ahead.
Okay. With what you were saying in terms of, for example, the debates in the coffee houses, and which I love debates. But here's what has changed about America. Now, if you wear a baseball cap with a MAGA hat, Make America Great Again, if you put a bumper sticker on your car for Trump, if you put a sign for Trump outside, you are totally assuming quite a risk that somebody is going to damage your property or possibly hurt you. And there have been people who have been assaulted over. I mean, my elderly uncle was wearing just a hat. He's a veteran, a Korean War veteran, and he was wearing a hat with an American flag on it. And I used to be a little concerned about whether somebody might do something crazy to him. And so the climate, the political climate has changed, and it is palpable, because I'm just telling you, you risk real threat to your property or your personhood if you put a Trump sign out. And we all know that. I mean, I'd like to know how many Trump signs are out there in places that aren't, overly conservative, cities or towns. But so that has changed. And when that changed, given that change, that is what starts to light the fire for creating not just enemies in terms of political thought, but out and out enemies. And I don't want that to happen. I want my country to be the way it has been during my life, not this craziness, this disgusting thing that has become now. And so to think that it's not, that things aren't getting ready to rise to a boil, it is rising to a boil, because there are too many of us right now who have to think twice in terms of what we say and to whom and to how many people are around, out of concern for our safety. And so that's where, it takes people with courage to speak out and let the chips fall where they may. But, we have to have courage. And the left never seems to be short of that. They will do all sorts of things. But part of the reason why the left has that courage is because they know that frequently on the other side, we're neutered. And many times, it's part of us being neutered has to do with, or maybe not neutered, but part of us is because our hands are tied because of our Christianity, in terms of not engaging in underhanded tactics or immoral tactics. And part of it is just that we frequently seek to get along. And sometimes we value getting along with the other side more than doing what we need to do to protect our country and doing what's right. So that was my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks, Teddy. So I do want to move on. Let's start addressing specific things these guys say. The Supreme Court sides with the church. Social distancing is important. The church has basically got a license to kill. Teddy, you did bring that up at first. So this kind of brings me into like the historical argument here, because we have this issue. And David Johnson brings, there's a, he acts like the issue is with conservative Christians. Like this is the country's problem is Christianity. Let's mix it up. Caleb, why don't you start us out? This whole idea of the historical, and I'll comment last.
So is it on the Supreme Court decision or just the general?
That and the general. Just go wherever you want to go with it.
Oh yeah. So I think that the idea that the license to kill terminology is misleading, because I think it's Teddy said earlier, there's a lot of personal responsibility on the person. It's similar to saying, we should be allowed to sell tobacco products and even fast food. I mean, it's obviously bad for your health and you're taking a risk by doing it. But, as long as people are informed and are aware that there is a risk, which I don't imagine how anyone could not think that at this point, then I think that part of the responsibility is on them. And so I don't think you can take complete blame for it. And I also don't like how John MacArthur handled it. I think that he went in the opposite direction. I do think churches should take precautions to try, they shouldn't just invoke being unsafe. I think masks and stuff are great. But I think that completely banning it is horribly unconstitutional and just uncalled for. And although there are online services and stuff which are good, there are certain, like Catholicism, which I'm not Catholic, but I'm aware that in Catholicism, when they do the Eucharist, they have to have the priest bless it, and they believe it literally transforms into water, into blood and bread. Now, whether or not blood and skin, whether or not you believe that, I think either way, the whole point is it has to be done in person, right? I don't think you can do that virtually, as far as I'm aware. So some religious rituals have to be done, I think, in person in order for them to happen. So if we're going to value that, then I don't see how you could realistically ban it while still being constitutional. I do think that comes to a personal liberty idea, and the term that was thrown around by a couple people was consent of the governed, and that's why I like that, and that's why think libertarianism, in my opinion, is most consistent, because we desire the consent of the governed on all aspects of life, whether it be your personal life, your social life, or your economic life. And we think the government should stay out of every aspect it can. And I think the idea, although not practical, would be what I call individual anarchism, which is not the idea that the government doesn't exist, but the idea that you can control your own life with your own autonomy, as long as you also grant that right to other people and you let them do it. So obviously the exception to that, and this is what we call the non-aggression principle in libertarianism, is that you can't harm a person or another person or their property directly, because then you'd be indulging on their freedom. So in the ideal world, everyone could do what they want, but the government's there to stop people from infringing on the rights of other people without their consent. Now, if you, in contractual agreements in areas where there is consent, Facebook was brought up. They are a private company and they can run it how they want. I don't want the government coming in saying you have to let conservatives speak, because I think that's government regulation. I don't like that Facebook is censoring people, but the idea of if I can opt out freely without any violence being done, I think that's preferable. So I do think that that's ultimately the role of government, and I respect that God gave us free will for that decision. And although people do things with that free will that I obviously don't agree with, I don't think that it is our job to go in and enforce it as Christians. I think that would just cause more resentment, which is why God doesn't, force us to love him and to accept him. And ultimately, I think government is just there to keep order and to make sure that we don't hurt each other or each other's property. But I don't want the government coming in telling me how to have to do a church service, or who you can love, or how you can run a business, and many other things. And so I guess that's just where I'll leave it.
All right, Rob, I want you to hear from you first, or second.
I think we're going to find ourselves, Caleb spoke about personal autonomy. I think we're going to probably find ourselves eventually. I'm not sure when that's going to be. I'm not a prophet, nor am I a son of a prophet. But there's levels of civil disobedience in ethics. And I think it's going to be a matter of conscience. I think with the question about government and the Supreme Court, I think the current administration acted constitutionally. And I think the liberal left, with the change before this administration, they had the same situation and they opted not to, thinking that it was to be for the next administration. Now, that's neither here nor there. But I think we have to understand that what we're seeing is a little bit, not a little bit, but a lot of government overreach. And I think the Christian conscience is going to be whether or not we're going to submit to Caesar, or we're going to act in Christian conscience and say, this is what I will not do. I will not support paying taxes to fund federally funded abortions. I will not pay taxes towards funding euthanasia, which could happen. Things that are violating the moral law of God. Romans 13 does speak to this, speaking in our context here as believers. Romans 13 is going to be one I think we're going to have to know as much as we know our Constitution, if not better.
All right. Well, Dale, let's get you in here, and we'll let Teddy close it out.
All right. So yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I think that the Supreme Court decision to uphold religious rights was great. I know that the skeptics were kind of thinking, oh, it's only they were trying to make it seem like only Christians get to meet, and no, that it's every religious adherent gets to. Yeah. At least if I understand the ruling, I'm not an American, but yeah, I guess just to contribute something unique from a Canadian perspective. So I think that we have what are called our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and these are entrenched rights. These are very important to uphold, and you should only ever infringe on those rights in certain circumstances. So we have what's called a reasonable limits clause in our Constitution for our rights, and there are certain tests that you have to meet before you can infringe on someone's rights. So number one, you have to prove that so when you infringe on someone's rights, it has to be to a minimal degree, as minimal as possible, and it also has to pass a proportionality test, meaning that the consequences of it are proportional and not worse than the benefits from infringing on the right. And with these lockdowns, I don't think that they're doing that. Just a total broad lockdown. They're not passing this Oakes test and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's sort of my stance, is why I think it's wrong. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional, and we should be fighting it.
All right, Teddy. You gotta unmute yourself.
Sorry. Keep forgetting. So I do believe that the federal government and the local government, I do think that they have the ability in times of crisis to make sometimes certain unusual restrictions on our liberty, but they have to have a reasonable basis for doing so and for how long that goes for. And there is going to constantly have to be this assessment of risk benefit in terms of risk to our liberties and our freedoms versus benefit. So I do acknowledge that. And I think that because part of the thing is not everybody has good judgment. If everybody had good judgment, we wouldn't have to worry about things. So while I would have preferred, for example, for shops and stores to have on their own mandated that if you want to come into this shop, you better wear a mask. But the problem is, in the very beginning, in the city that I live in, they weren't doing that. So you go in, and given what the science was telling us, which of course, remember, the science was telling us that corona spreads very easily and can be on everything. You need to wipe down your groceries. And now the science is telling us that, well, it doesn't seem to adhere very well to a lot of these items. And so you don't really need to wipe down your groceries and this and that. So, that's one of the things about science. It's certain up until the point that a new experiment shows it to be uncertain. So how certain really is it? It's not, but it's the best thing we've got. So I'm very pro science, but so I was actually very glad when, they started to put some rules and regs on businesses to require masks, because so many people weren't doing it on their own. And so then that puts other people at risk, from what we thought in terms of what the science was telling us, of going to a store to get necessities. So I don't have a problem with in these types of situations. We have to bend a little bit, but when they started engaging in this hypocrisy of Mario Cuomo, let's put a bunch of COVID positive people into nursing homes. And Andrew's talking about, churches are going to be killing off all the old people. What about the New York governor that was putting all those people, the COVID positive people, back into nursing homes, infecting everyone? That is what I'm saying about there is a lack of intellectual consistency and honesty in the dialogue. There is, how can he say that with a straight face to people who know better, yet they'll still say it? And so, how much can you deal with people? It's always really, you're not going to change their mind. It's the third party listener that we are hoping to potentially influence, because we're not going to change the mind of somebody that's engaging in that kind of argumentation that they know for a fact is just, horse pucky. So I'm glad that at least the Supreme Court stood up for that. It was overdue. And I think even before that case, there was a situation in New York among, I think, some Jewish people where they weren't letting them congregate. I think it was dealing with a playground or something. But anyway, but so, we have to remember that with the Bill of Rights, when they were adopted along with the Constitution, the the framers of the Constitution, many of which were our founding fathers, the very first amendment that they wanted to make so explicit, because they knew that it was understood from the Constitution that that was a very limited document in terms of limiting the powers of the federal government. So they understood, they were thinking, well, we really don't need to attach this Bill of Rights because we're already saying this is what the federal government can do. This is what the states can do. It should be obvious. But they were like, well, but you know what? Maybe some people won't understand it to be so obvious. So they put the Bill of Rights in. And of course, the very first amendment, what is the first thing that is mentioned? It gets into freedom of religion, that the federal government, Congress, shall not establish a national religion. Now, at that time, there were several state governments that did have state-sponsored religions. So these people that misconstrue what Jefferson was talking about, this wall with church and state, actually, that wall was meant so that the state would not infringe upon the church, not the other way around. People don't understand that very well. But, so we need to remember that, and then there's just not just that there shouldn't be a state-sponsored or a federal religion, official religion, but that everyone should have the freedom of religion. And then afterwards is freedom of speech and freedom of association. But we should never forget that the very first thing that was mentioned was religion. And so, that's an important thing for people to keep in mind. And I will say, freedom to have an absence of religion as well. We have to, we have to be tolerant, and tolerance is what God teaches us, because from God's own behavior, where He gives us free will, that's basically tolerance in the highest form.
Hey, Teddy, do you mind if I just quickly ask, because I know that you're a lawyer, in the U.S. context, do you guys have anything from a legal standpoint comparable to the Oakes test that Canada has for assessing if there can be a reasonable limit to our rights?
Oh, yes. I mean, they're constant. For example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So there's constantly these balancing of rights and responsibilities and how far the government can infringe on things. So yes. We have over the years come so far away from what the Bill of Rights says. I mean, for example,
let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about first off David Johnson makes the case that our government is purely secular. Purely secular. Let's talk a little bit about that, and let's talk about the actual separation of church and state. Let's talk about religious liberty in general, because religious liberty wasn't an absolute right, because it had to follow or not violate the rules of society. According to the founders, government can support religion if that religion does not violate the religious liberty of others. Massachusetts, they had a policy on giving money to preachers. Prayer and basic Christian teachings were encouraged in school. Encouraging religion was viewed as a duty of government for the sake of protecting natural rights. So these ideas that came out, I mean, even John Adams says our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So are we purely secular, or is there a philosophy behind this thing? Is there an actual idea of, the founders would have called it, religious people, and being able to display a type of moral virtue in the way they govern our society? Is there that aspect as well? Let's give it to the political science major again.
So you were asking whether or not what the role of religion and state is, as far as the separate or
Yeah, I
the
mean, what do you
lack of
think?
separation.
Are we purely a secular government, or do we have roots in religious thought?
Well, I think as far as roots, and I mean, I think that's obviously yes. I mean, prior to I think it was the 1950s, prayer was pretty common in schools. It was fairly, common. So I don't think anyone can deny that evangelicalism was the dominant view within the public institution for probably 100 years or more. As far as the founding fathers, I know we discussed this a little bit. I think most of them, to my knowledge, were deists to a certain degree, and were not necessarily. Some of them were Christians, but they weren't as conservative as you might think. I know Thomas Jefferson wrote he authored his own version of the Bible, but he took out all the miracles. He liked Jesus as a person. He just didn't believe in all the supernatural intervention in the world. Thomas Paine and a couple others, I think, as well. But I also think that religion obviously has played a very important role in history. And I know there was a Supreme Court case, I think this was back in the 50s or 60s, I could be wrong, whereas Jehovah's Witnesses didn't want to salute the flag and say the Pledge of Allegiance because it violated their religion. And I think the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Jehovah's Witnesses, if I remember correctly. So there is that idea of infringement on religious rights. So I would say my position would be that what I think it was Rob who brought it up earlier, like taxpayer, funding to abortion or euthanasia or whatever. I would agree with both ways. I would say that I don't think that taxpayer money should go to fund any promotion of religion or religious institution. I also don't think anything funded by taxpayers should go to prohibit it either. So if someone wants to have a Bible study, for example, a teacher can lead it as long as the teacher is not being paid for that particular time. I don't know if it's hourly or how the salaries work exactly. But you can also teach religions in public schools, just religious classes. I don't think anything's wrong with that as long as you're not particularly, endorsing one over the other. But you also see those with state houses with the Ten Commandments and even with the Satanist statutes, which I know we also discussed. I think one or two states had the Church of Satan that had a big statue of I forget what of the goat. I forget what the thing is called. There's a Baphomet. That's the word. That's the word for it in front of it as a way to express individual liberty. And although I obviously don't like it, I think they have that right. As long as taxpayer money doesn't go to fund the actual statue. If a private organization wants to raise the funds to do it, that's fine. I would say the same with the Ten Commandments. I don't think they should be taken down, but I don't think taxpayer money should be used to go to fund as far as the making of the statue. If a church wants to hire their own person to do it and then put it on there, I think that's perfectly fine. So I would just say it comes down to where the money is going and who's funding it. As long as it's not being funded by the government, I don't see any issue in it for any religion.
All right. Anybody else?
Yep.
Springboarding
off of something that Caleb just said, in 1972, the Wiccans were actually one of the first occult groups in the United States that I can recall that received tax-exempt status. So you talked about liberty. And, of course, I think America has lost its concept on liberty. I've been listening to Oz Guinness lately, and he has a book that I started reading. I got about 3/4 through it, and I ended up getting distracted, called The Free People's Suicide, How America Has Lost Its Identity on Liberty. And I think we have lost our identity, and I agree with him, that we've lost our identity and liberty, seeing as liberty as a virtue. Now we see liberty and freedom as a matter of personal autonomy. And it's like I can say what I want to say, I can do what I want to do, and you should not infringe upon my liberties. And of course, the other kind of liberty where liberty is a virtue is liberty with a limit. And of course, isn't that biblical liberty? Biblical liberty is where we are free in Christ. If you walk in his commandments, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And anybody who's we've been made free on this because we have that liberty. But that liberty has restrictions, and true liberty has restrictions when we understand what the Constitution has to say about what we can and cannot do, and not. I don't think the Constitution is a rubber document. I think it's, through sound critical thinking, we can understand our liberties and all. Also, there's a video series through, I think it's through Eric Metaxas's group, where Guinness gives a series of talks on where is America heading. The question was, is America a secular government? If America keeps going where it is going, America removing religion will be truly a secular government.
Thank you, Rob. Teddy, you're next.
So I deeply believe, and it is what our founding fathers and framers of the Constitution believed in, and that is that our society is the whole foundation for this society, for America, it's undergirded by the Judeo-Christian values. And to say otherwise is to just either not know what you're talking about or just trying to make things look like they're what they're not. They're just Congress, they start off their sessions with a prayer. The Supreme Court building has the 10 Commandments, very obviously and prominently displayed. Our penal laws are, for the most part, based upon the 10 Commandments. They're just so, our currency has things like "In God We Trust" and our monuments, and we have religious symbols all over the place. So to make it seem like America is secular, that's absurd. Now, just because, and they have the Easter egg roll every year at the White House, even under Obama, they did it. And they put up a Christmas tree. So again, it's absurd to think that our government is just totally secular. Now, that's not to say that, you can be you can have religious underpinnings to your government, yet still be tolerant of other religions and still uphold the value of freedom of religion. And so if somebody has a religion where they get closer to God by murdering people, well, then we have the whole concept of your rights end as soon as they start impinging upon someone else's rights. So, there's that's where the key limit comes into play. So, but yes, this is not a secular government. That's not the same as saying that it's a theocracy, because again, we're tolerant of other religions. So we're not Iran.
All right. Dale, do you have any thoughts on this? I know it doesn't apply to you much, but I'm sure you do have some weigh in there.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think I agree with what both Teddy and Caleb were saying, and Rob in general. There's one thing I'm not sure about, but yeah, we have to go back to what was the point of secularism. This thing has a historical context. It's in reaction to what happened in England with the religious persecution back and forth between the religious factions and that sort of thing. So basically, what the U.S. Constitution, from my understanding as a Canadian, was about, it's about not infringing on people's ability to freely worship whatever faith you are, kind of thing. And that's what secularism is about. It's not about, you can't have a Christmas tree because that's promoting religious thing. I was told a bunch of things I'm not allowed to say, or I could get fired. I'm in academia, right? I'm a teacher, so at a secular university and that sort of thing. So I think we're going to crazy limits when we become, if you say Merry Christmas, oh, that's so offensive. How dare you say that? And that's not secularism. Come on. This is just nonsense, in my opinion. It's more about not imposing or endorsing a specific religion and preventing other people from doing that sort of thing. So that's sort of my fundamental take on what the point of secularism is about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I truly think that and this is where me and Caleb disagreed in our talk as we were setting this up, is that, from my studies of the history of the Constitution, which I am taking a registered class for, there were over 50 out of the 52 that were committed to a church that created the Constitution. They're committed to Christianity. Even Jefferson, who was an Episcopalian, who did favor deism over the teaching of the Episcopal Church, still had high regard for religion in the society. These framers believed that government had a vested interest in religion because they knew that you can't have morality without religion. We still discuss this today. I mean, we had a big old roundtable on morality. But I don't want to just say this without backing it up. George Washington said that of all the dispositions and habits which lead to a political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He also said that you can't whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect the national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. The liberty, he also says, the liberty enjoyed by the people of these states of worshiping Almighty God agreeably to their consciences is not only among the choicest of their blessings, but also of their rights. There's a lot of stuff to be said here. There's a lot of stuff in our founding that we take for granted. We don't understand their system of thought, their idea of separation of church and state. The state could promote certain things. It was left up to them, and it was kind of the federal government's idea to stay out of them as long as that, again, they didn't infringe on people's right to worship other things. The problem is we've softened up to the point where if somebody sees something they don't like and complain about it, they'll cry loud enough to where they're going to take you to court and try to get their way. And it works in a lot of areas. Another big one is the Second Amendment. We didn't talk about that one. And I think we're going to wrap it up with that one.
Okay.
Do
you mind if I
Go
just
ahead, Dale.
Oh, sorry. If it's okay, can I just ask Rob a quick question for clarification? So you mentioned the liberty with limits, and yep, fully agree with you. From a biblical or moral standpoint, definitely Christians have limits. Like I can't swear or use crude jokes to promote the message and stuff like that. I'm not sure. Did you also mean that from like a legal or political perspective? I'm not sure if did you mean in that context as well, or?
I appreciate your question, David. I guess where I was coming from on that was just from the concepts of liberty and freedom, and as far as what they were intended by our framers, and where America has gone. When you talk about Christian liberty, you're dealing with the Christian conscience as far as what you understand Scripture to say, to mean, and how it applies. But ultimately, true freedom, and I believe that the spiritual realm is the higher level. I don't think anybody will disagree with us here on that. That true freedom is in a personal relationship with Christ. But yes, there is a moral law that we are still bound to. We're not bound under the ceremonial law. We're bound under the moral law of God. We believe, or at least I do, that with regards to the ceremonial law of Israel, that it was embedded, it had Christ, a picture of who Jesus is and what he was going to come to do for us, that it was a picture of who Jesus was. We are not under that ceremonial law. We're under a moral law. So that's where the restrictions are. Does that answer your question?
Can I say one more? I was going to make a quick comment on that too, but he got ahead of me. Now, I was just going to say, I think that this idea of liberty is going to depend a little bit on your theology, because I know that Rob is a little bit more reformed in his definition of free will, and I'm more of an Arminian and Molinist. So I think this idea of freedom with limits is definitely a little bit more of a compatibilist point of view. Saying that a puppet is free as long as he loves his strings, kind of thing. So I think that's just why we'd have slightly disagreements as far as what
I don't believe we are a puppet, and I do believe that we have free will. There's a fine line between the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm just saying I think you and I would define free will slightly differently, which there's a reason why it's called libertarian free will.
Not too much. Yeah.
Dale?
Right, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that answers my question. I was misunderstanding what you were meaning there. So yeah, thanks for clarifying that up.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I want to open it up to you guys. I've kind of been given spiels and stuff like that. I do want to open it up to you guys to respond to anything you saw in the video that really stood out to you. I'll let Caleb go first, since he's the Sci major there, political science major. So, Caleb.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't watch the whole video, so if someone else can go first, and I'll build off of what they say.
All right, good. Anybody else want to take a stab at the video?
I watched about 2/3 of the video. I found it interesting that there were some folks in that were speaking to David that I think we could have a dialogue with. They seemed a little bit more amenable to dialogue and speaking to an intelligent type of Christianity. David, on the other hand, I don't know what it is that has him all spun up about that we are the enemy, that there is no dialogue that is available. My question to him would be, what would open up the opportunity for dialogue? What is it that closed the dialogue? I don't think that was dispelled in the video. Like I said, like Caleb, I didn't watch all of the video, and I don't think I heard what in that and what I watched. But I think that I go back to seeing the video that I put on their thread, the dialogue between Corey Miller from Ratio Christi and Peter Boghossian, who wrote the book basically on how to take a Christian who does not think with their mind about why Christianity is true and convert him into an atheist in 10 minutes or less. I find it interesting that Corey and Peter Boghossian were talking, and both of them were saying that our culture and academia is in trouble. And I mentioned earlier that academia right now is pushing a liberalism that we are seeing. And if you go back 30 years from where academia was, I think it started even 40 years ago, where we are seeing now the trends happening, where now the schools have become more and more dens of skepticism, not just in the 90s, but even more today. And even some Christian colleges are opening up, allowing the camel to come in and allowing people holding to a neo-Orthodox view or even some type of liberal view. There are pockets in universities in our culture today that profess to be Christian universities, and a conservative isn't necessarily conservative as far as a biblical evangelical conservative, but conservative just maybe on some other things. But I digressed. What is it that will open up the dialogue? And if there is a dialogue still, I think we have some good examples with the Boghossian-Miller discussion that I hope you gentlemen on your video watch and see that it can be done.
All right. Who's next? This is your chance to address the video specifically.
Okay. There was a point on the video where Brian with a Y was saying something in terms of the elections, how, Trump kept saying that the election was going to be fraudulent, and like he was trying to prime the pump for that. But there's a reason. He wasn't just saying it. We were watching all of these election laws in several states that were, strongholds for Republicans, where the election laws were being changed in order to lower what the safeguards were against voter fraud. So, there's a reason why, not only Trump, but every, Republican with half a brain was saying they're going to steal the election, and then we're going to have a commander in thief. I think I just dubbed that. Anyway, so David said something which I found was curious. Hold on, I'm trying to find it. It was where he was talking about freedom of religion. Trying to find it, sorry. But he said something to the effect of, why do I need government to give me freedom of religion? I think that's what it was. Why does he need government to give him freedom of religion? Because he was saying, I can just have it. Well, yeah, you can have it in your brain, but you can't exercise it and you can't spread it unless you live in a society, or you can't spread it very well unless you live in a society that isn't going to try to kill you or imprison you if you were doing so. So, sure, there, in certain...
Let me just add this too, Teddy. I agree that for any type of free society to exist, there has to be religious freedom. Mm-hmm. Even though I tell people it's a double-edged sword sometimes, there has to be freedom of religion. And I think the other side of that sword is one of the reasons we have so many skeptics, is because we've had the fundamentalists like the Westboro Baptists ruin Christianity for some people.
And they're in the Westboro Baptists. I mean, people mention that they're pretty much. I'm only aware of just one group, and that's a tiny group. I know it's pretty much the dude's family.
Like 40 people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and they're all, I believe, family members. So when people bring up the Westboro Baptist Church, that's just such a red herring. I mean, we don't have, no, granted, there are some people who profess to be Christians that do and say a lot of things that I strongly disagree with and might even condemn, but even those people are usually nothing close to the loons that are in the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah, but you see where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, we have had, there's several times I would walk down on the beach on my vacation and
Mm-hmm.
see signs in Virginia Beach with people saying, God hates you because you're gay, or God hates you
I've
because
never
you're
seen
a Muslim.
anything like that in my life.
And I have.
I don't doubt
it kind of puts up the idea, okay, so is David Johnson just hanging around those type of Christians? Because Matthew, like Rob was saying, there's some other people on the panel, Matthew was very gracious. And I enjoyed a lot of what he had to say on that panel discussion. And it was like, who are you hanging out with versus who was Matthew hanging out with? And there is a divide.
But the thing that Matthew talks about, he's good with the Christians who have a far looser sense of Christianity in terms of adhering to what the Bible says. And that's because it doesn't come into as sharp a contrast with his own worldview. But here's the thing, and here's like, and Andrew and Matthew and David, they all frequently talk about, they make it seem like we have a choice in terms of which God, which religion to pick, and that's absurd. We need to find out what is true, because you know what? I don't need a religion just to have a religion. I'm fine if there were no God. In fact, I don't need a God to feel good about life, but I believe that there is a God. And so then that puts the responsibility on me to figure out, well, who is God? What is God? Does God have any rules for me? And if so, what is the basis for thinking that? And is it credible? And if it is credible, which I do believe that it is, then are there repercussions if you don't adhere to the rules? And, the Bible tells us that there are. So then we need to follow the rules if we don't wish to, be in opposition to God. So it's not that we choose as, I want to go with the Christian God just because, I align with that philosophy. It's I go with the Christian God because that is the God that I think is real and true. And so they like to, the atheists like to make it seem like we're going to a cafeteria and we have our choices in terms of which God to pick. But that's like childish thinking. That is not what religion is. If you don't believe that it's true, then I'm sure there are some people that like having religion just as a, kind of as the opiate of the masses because it makes them feel good. I'm not one of them. I don't need religion to feel good. Not at all. I'm just fine all by my lonesome without religion. I don't need it to feel good. But
I hear you.
I know that it's true, and there is something that's really good about when you know that it's true, and knowing that this life, with all of its joys and heartaches, that this is, I think, just a proving ground. God sees how we react to these choices and to these difficult situations, and later on is what our true reward is.
So, I hear you. Yeah, let's Dale, I think I want you to make a comment here. Did you notice anything from the video that you wanted to address real quick?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point for me that comes up a lot in politics is, so obviously I have come out and said, yeah, I support Trump in this election and that sort of thing. So I'm on the conservative end. But I find that a lot of times I just get this emotional reaction as an objection, and it's based on objecting to Trump, his moral character, his personal moral character, his tweets, all that stuff, rather than policy, rather than what I consider to be the substantive meat, the reason why we should be voting. So there's this contrast. Is personal moral character more important than getting policy? So it really, David Johnson put it in the ends justify the means type reasoning. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. But to me, I don't think that personal moral character really matters when I'm electing an official or hiring a grocer or something like that, unless you can prove that it actually affects policy. So for example, hypocrisy that Teddy was mentioning, that really bothers me because that directly translates to how they implement their policies and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that there should be a distinction. I don't care what Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Bill Clinton did in their private time, so long as they're not committing a crime or they're not impacting policy. But a lot of people see it differently. They see, no, the moral character is the most relevant and that sort of thing. And they see that as sort of an issue. So yeah, I was just sort of curious about the other Christians on that distinction. because I don't see it as an issue. And I know that David Johnson has used that. So Caleb and Rob won't know that, but when David's going on about you've lost your credibility, he's talking to me directly. I'm not going to believe you and all of your arguments for God and all of this stuff.
He's just picking you out, huh?
Yeah, if you understand the context. So that's what he means, because he sees me as being some sort of hypocrite. You have these Christian moral standards, and you're not.
Dale, a lot of people don't realize that you were the former Christian host on Skeptics and Seekers. Just Teddy does, so that's why he's saying that. Go ahead, Dale.
Gotcha. Yeah. David's my my much better host replacement. So, David Russell. But yeah, that's what it's just such a fundamental misunderstanding. For Christians aren't supposed to. I don't believe Donald Trump is a Christian and that sort of thing in the real sense. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not voting for a pastor. We're not supposed to hold Christian ideals and judge non-believers in that way. So, yeah, just wondering how do you guys see that? Do you guys think that personal moral character should be a relevant factor in voting for something?
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up. I'm of the personal conviction that what you do in your private life should not be separate from what you do in public. You should be consistent. Okay. There should be consistency there, and that's just a measure of character. Now, I do agree that a lot of the fire charge rhetoric that's going on is because the reason why people did not vote for Trump or voted for Trump, did not vote for Trump, was because of his alleged moral character and what he did several years ago. Now, none of us are perfect. All of us live in glass houses. We could do the same thing with Biden. We could do the same thing with how much he interacts with Russia and China and how much his kid went and got money from them. But that's a whole nother can of worms. But what you do in your private life has no different from what you do in your public life. One thing that was brought up, I think, with the confusion that David and maybe some of the others on that video, was the fact of what they see Donald Trump as far as the Christians that he has around him. They don't make policy, obviously. And I think policy, voting for somebody, getting back real quickly, you vote for somebody who's going to put good people around them and implement the policies that you as a person believe your convictions lead you to believe. But I think with the confusion that the atheists are seeing, in particular those in the video, we're seeing the type of Christianity that we see today. There was a video that came out a few years ago called Mining for God, and had some top apologists in there. It is still out, and we're trying to get it shown here in the King George area, in the Spotsy area. But you look at some of the people the types of Christianity. We have prosperity gospel, name it, claim it. We have progressive Christianity now, which is a little bit more liberal, that has gone, it's a repackaging of the emergent church of the late 80s and early 90s. We have the New Apostolic Reformation going, and Donald Trump has a lot of New Apostolic Reformation people going with the Seven Mountain Mandate, that is going and saying we got to get Christians in every pocket of culture so that we can make this a Christian nation again. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. First Amendment, yay. But there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of chaos in the church today as far as what Christianity really is. And I think that's probably what the atheists are going and saying that you can worship, you have a whole smorgasbord of whatever God you want to worship. And I think what we need to understand when we talk about this in this context, we need to understand what we do. And I mean, Caleb and I, we have our differences. David and I, we have, some little innuendos and stuff that we love to kick around. And I'm not sure where Teddy is on some things and what type of church, but it doesn't matter. What
Teddy's a bear. She's all over the place.
Teddy's
She'll take everybody out.
But you know, Jesus Christ is God in human flesh. He came because man screwed things up.
Yeah.
And the crux of the gospel is God created everything perfectly. Man messed it up. Jesus came, lived a life that was perfect, preached a message that was perfect, healed, raised the dead, overtipped the tables of those who had corrupted the law, died in our place for our substitute because of the wrath of God that was going to be incurring on us because we are sinful, human, frail creatures, and
All right.
ultimately
So
rose from the dead.
yes. So okay. So what we're gonna do now, just real quick. I know
I-
Dale asked. Dale did ask the Christians. Hold on, Teddy. That asked them a specific question. I'm going to start the round table here. Rob, I'm just going to take that as your statement there because you answered Dale first. I'm going to go. I'm gonna give what I thought real quick, and then give my closing, and then Teddy, you can answer Dale's question, and then give your closing. Caleb, then give your closing. Guys, let's make it like at least just a 2 minutes. Just go as quick as you can. Um, the one issue I had, or to Dale's question first, Dale, yeah, I think that there needs to be consistency in people's morals, but I also understand your point that we're not electing a pastor. I get that. I also get the fact that somebody that does have moral character, I think that was the framers' idea of somebody that would be good at protecting natural rights. So I think there's that aspect as well. My biggest issue with the video, not the biggest issue, but one issue that I don't think was properly addressed so far is the Electoral College. To me, the Electoral College was brilliant. I think that if one of these atheists or skeptics, they need to read the Federalist Papers. You need to read the Federalist Papers. You need to understand how our country was created. There's free courses at Hillsdale College that will give you the history of the Constitution. If you want to look into it, you can register for free. I've been enjoying all their courses for free. They got a Western philosophy one as well, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, so if you want to go and learn about the Constitution and stuff, the Electoral College gives every state a say in the republic. This is not a pure democracy. I don't think Trump was a threat to our republic. Why? Because we can oust him just like we did, or the people may have done. With the election results, he can be out. He can be voted out. Did he do enough? All this damage? I don't think so. Did he create a racial division? Probably, if he just shut up and didn't get on Twitter all the time. So I think, yeah, some of his rhetoric did cause even more of a divide, but I believe that divide was already there. I think it was there, and I think it started a while back. I think it started during probably the end of the Bush administration. This divide really started kicking up. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it was just Obama. I'm not going to say here it was Trump. I'm not going to say it was just Bush. But it's a combination of to me a sway in demographics in this country, worldview. We live in a culture where memes are truth. When I was growing up, it used to be one-liners, quick quips, as we call them, where someone would say something and it would be like a one-liner. And that was the truth. People would hang off their words like that when it was just the skin of this truth stuffed with a big fat lie. So we live in a culture today where memes are that avenue. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. I think the culture has its issues versus just the politics. I think the politics are just kind of the way we can view the sickness that is going on in our culture. And of course, I think as a Christian that a lot of it has to do with the abandonment of virtuous principles that were firmly rooted in the Christian faith. There's the Electoral College. So back to the Electoral College. Yes, it gives every state a say in the process. Could it be reformed a little bit? maybe. But yes, it gives every state a say in the republic, and that's how it has to be. We can't have 5 major population centers dictating to the people that feed them how the country should be ran all the time. We have to give the people that feed them a say as well. So there's a lot to that I wasn't able to cover, but in the end of the day, that's my take. I will give it over to Caleb. I haven't heard from him in a little bit. So, Caleb, your closing statement and whatever you want to talk about the video there.
All right, yeah. So I have a lot written down, but I'll just keep it brief. So going back to the moral character thing, I think moral character is preferable, but I also don't think it's necessary. If you look at some of the major changes in the 20th century, for example, probably the most influential act regarding African Americans in the 20th century would be Johnson's Civil Rights Act. I think it was 1964. Johnson himself was a pretty fervent racist and opposed every civil rights bill while he was in Congress. He even called it the N-word bill at one point, but he ended up, passing it to help give people a lot of rights. So I think you can have, and of course that was for political reasons, but I think you can have bad intentions and good results in the long run. Same with Martin Luther King Jr. was an adulterer who cheated on his wife, and yet he obviously did a lot of great things. The original Martin Luther as well, from the Protestant Reformation, was very anti-Semitic and said a lot of horrible things, but he also was very influential with theology. So we could pick apart as many examples as we want of people who have very questionable moral characters that still manage to achieve great things. So that's kind of the approach that I would have. With the Electoral College, I agree. I would want it reformed a little bit in the sense that I think it should be proportional for a state. So, for example, instead of winning all of California or all of Texas, I think the winner should get, so if you win by 60%, you should get 60% of the electoral votes. That way, every state is competitive to a certain degree and not just winner take all. I do think it's a little unfortunate when especially in this election, when it's so close, you can win a state by 0.2% and yet get all of the electoral votes, even though it was almost evenly split. So I do think there are ways you could proportionally divide it, but I also think it's better than just a popular vote, because I think, ironically, even though a lot of people on the left like to talk about minorities, I think a popular vote would be the worst thing you could do for minorities, because they're never going to get a majority. African Americans, Latinos, or LGBT people, all of them are in minority, so they're not going to have an advantage when it comes to just pure populations if we want to go off of that. So if anything, I think we should do a system that benefits both sides and tries to make it as fair as possible.
Caleb, let me just offer further reading on that too. Federalist 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah, definitely. I've read them before in undergraduate school. I just have to go back and read them. But yeah, to close, thanks for being on here. I'm glad that we could all talk about this and have great discussions, and I look forward to having more discussions like this in the future to help unite our country together. And if I ever run for a political office, hopefully keep this in mind when considering your vote. So I'll end it on that point.
Awesome. All right. Who's next? Teddy?
Yes. I wanted to talk about the concept of whether our leaders need to be moral and have a good moral character. And that is what I prefer, most definitely. I think that when you have someone in charge of the country or someone in charge of making laws and making decisions, if they are not of good moral character, then you run a strong risk of inconsistent results, or where you just can't even trust them. And so I don't like that. But, the reality of things is that sometimes you have a choice between two people or several people, and none of them really are your ideal. And so you have to pick who the best person is among the choices that you have. And to do something like, what Titus supports of just not being involved in the process and at all, that's just madness. You have to at least try to mitigate the damage that two poor choices might do. So, the lesser of two evils. In terms of LBJ, it really wasn't. I mean, people like to call it his Civil Rights Act. He wasn't the one fueling that. It was the Republicans. It's always, always, always been the Republicans fueling getting the right to vote for women and getting rid of slavery. It's always getting rid of separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson. And it's always been the Republicans. And that the whole Republican Party was started as an abolitionist party, and people forget that. And people forget that the Democrat Party was started with Andrew Jackson, who was the one that did the Trail of Tears, doing all of that damage to our Native Americans here. So, let's not forget our history. Most people have no concept of the history of the Democrat Party, and the Democrats who love to point fingers at everybody else. Oh, look, you like Trump. You must be a racist. How about you are in a party of the KKK, of slavery, of holding down women from having the right to vote. You get out of that party, and then I will think you have some sort of integrity. But until you get out of that disgusting party, then don't talk to me about, oh, well, you like Trump. You're a racist. You're a this. You're a that. Forget that. I have no use for such disingenuous talk. In terms of the Electoral College, the importance of the Electoral College, when we get down to the nitty-gritty, our framers of the Constitution knew that if you leave everything up to the people, there might come a time, and that time has come, where people are going to be doing some crazy stuff, not using their brains in terms of who they're putting into office. And the Electoral College was supposed to be the ultimate safeguard to where if the people elect, and that's assuming actually elect, not through rigging the system and also fraudulent votes. But even that's assuming if they legitimately even elect a kook, then the Electoral College is supposed to correct that. That is the ultimate thing for the Electoral College. And the biggest thing that I just want to close on is that the beauty of America. This is why, as much as the left likes to say that we have systemic racism, that's just a farce. Is that why you have people from all over the world dying sometimes, risking their lives to come to this land of milk and honey? It's because this is the greatest country that God has put on this earth, and we want to preserve it. It's the freedom that we have, the right of the individual, not the masses. The preservation of each individual having been created in the image of God, that is what we are trying to preserve, and that is what the left is trying to crush. And we have to stop that, and we have to rise against that, and the cowards in the Republican Party have to rise up against it. And there will come a point, and we have not perhaps come to that point yet, where we must at some point we may have to fight like a Democrat, and that's when it's going to get bare knuckled, and that's when you have war. That is war, when you have to fight like that, because right now they are fighting with underhanded moves. They are constantly kicking below the belt, and we have our hands tied. Well, they're going to destroy this country, and we already are seeing that. And it's unimaginable, but here it is. And so, we must still fight with our Christian moral values intact, but God does permit, in certain circumstances, getting rid of opposition when they're trying to crush you. I mean, it's not like that is unheard of in the Bible. I mean, we see that. Now, hopefully that will never come to it. And perhaps if Republicans, the most of them, grew a spine, it would never need to come to that. But if they are going to take away our right to have a free and fair election, then that time has come. And we have to rectify this, because Republicans and conservatives will never get anybody into any meaningful position again. So you know, the time for these weak-kneed and weak-willed Republicans kowtowing to their Democrat friends, you know, stand up. And if they don't like it, then too bad. And if that's the end of the friendship, that's the end of the friendship. But we cannot let this great country just go down the toilet. So fight.
Well, thank you, Teddy. You know, it's funny. When we're thinking about the Electoral College, just I want to add one more thing. Jefferson had this. He was an anti-federalist, and he was all for you know, the idea of the majority and stuff until he was governor of Virginia, and he came back and he realized that the majority tyranny that can go on could be just as bad as having a monarch. So there is that. Keep that in mind. Dale, I'm going to let you close this part out, and then I'll just say something brief at the end of the show, and then we'll be done.
Oh, goodness. I'm expected to follow up after Teddy's passionate speech there. I don't think I have that in me, but I'll give him a go. Yeah, I'll just say thank you so much to everyone involved. You guys gave me some great feedback on that question in terms of the development of the moral character. And I think one thing that you guys look, we don't live in an ideal world. None of these candidates are morally perfect. You know, I can bring out a laundry list of things against Joe Biden and that sort of thing if I wanted to. So we're trying to do the best that we can to make an overall judgment when we're doing this. And I think if we apply, you know, that principle of charity and give people the benefit of the doubt and present reasons back and forth like what we've been doing, and even between us as Christians, there have been one or two things that we haven't totally agreed on, but what a great example. We've been presenting our reasons and dialoguing civilly and that sort of thing. So that's what we need to do. David Johnson, if you're listening, there is still hope. We're still willing to talk if you are willing to talk, you know. So we're here. Come at me, bro, as David J likes to say.
Right on. Well, guys, I think that's it for Skeptics and Seekers this week. I'm David Russell, and there will be the superhero show coming on. I think that's Johnson's last one of the year. I know it is for me. This is my last one of the year. I won't be in the rest of the superhero show, but there is a secret. I am in part of it. So, just to let everybody know, I mean, it was a great time.
David.
What's that?
DC or Marvel?
DC.
Okay, good man. Okay.
I'm more DC. I do have a passion for Marvel too. There are some characters that I really love, but I am, if I'm hanging anything on the wall, it's the Man of Steel. You know, so yeah, so you know, I really enjoyed this, guys. I think that we can always have conversation, and I'm always for conversation and debate. If I lose to the majority of people that consent the other way, I live with it. There are some things I won't compromise on that I think are absolutely fundamental, that I don't think that, you know, just because there's a majority that says that it's okay to jump off a bridge, I'm not going to do it, you know. But there are things I won't compromise on. So at the end of the day, the skeptics are going to have to decide, and the Christians that watch the program. I hope we made some sort of, I think we made a pretty good case. So I'm just going to have to let everybody else decide on that. So this is David Russell, and this is the Christian Response.